Alright, so here's the second excerpt from my book. And little excerpt we're just going to call The Vampire in the Boxcar. We had hitched from La Pine, Buster and me, by getting a ride from a cool guy living out of suburban with his dog, a girl dog around Buster's age. We had been hitching from where the sidewalk ended in the sun amidst the snow slurries and cold mountains of clouds blocking the sun that was trying to peek through. He smoked pot, so we took a few breaks at some lovely places and got stoned while the dogs ran and played. It was still early, so neither of us was on a schedule, and he was headed to a friend's house to do some work and clean up, but his friend wouldn't be home until 7 o'clock. On our second stop, he asked me if I did heroin, and my eyes briefly lit up, and he smiled. I knew I shouldn't do any, as I had been clean since Wyoming, but it's hard to say no when it's right in front of you. I hesitantly said I'd do some, though he wouldn't have known it, as I agreed pretty rapidly. I have a little I brought down from Seattle. It's not a lot, but we could probably get a decent buzz, he mentioned. I need to sober up anyway and get rid of it. It is just the rest of what I have that I've been trying to wean myself off on. So he pulled out a black lockbox and opened it with a combination lock on the side, latching it shut. We fixed up in the back of his Suburban that was out of the wind. He had all the tools that were required of us, and after prepping everything, we blasted off in the back of his truck, melting into the comfortable third seating area that had been removed and replaced by a super thick memory foam mattress. It felt great, and I thanked him for his sharing. I tried to give him $10 for the ride and hospitality, though he wouldn't have it, a sign that he was just as seasoned a traveler as I not to ask or expect money from another tramp, regardless of our methods of travel. We jammed music for a bit and talked about random things we encountered on the road. He mentioned he rode trains to an extent, but it was never his thing. He liked the freedom of a four-wheel drive to go deep into the mountains. He looked like a mountain man. I felt disappointed I had used, but at least I wasn't strung out. I would be heading east to meet with Cassie, and she told me I had better be clean this time. I had promised I would. We got out of the truck and hung out by a small lake just north of Klamath Falls, Agency Lake, which was adjacent to an even larger lake, Upper Klamath. It was a public boat ramp in a beautiful little spot called Hensel Park. We had to chain the dogs up while we were inside for fear of them jumping into the lake or chasing geese, but they enjoyed just being out of the truck and in the grass after a good while, watching the sunset fall into a beautiful reflection over the lake. The clouds were the color of peaches, and the sky went from a dark blue to an orangish yellow, with dark, black, shadowy mountains below. The lake reflected and swayed, and the wind blew swiftly into the night's chill, cold air. Then, as the illumination ended and stars filled the sky, we loaded back up and continued our journey, briefly, to the town of Klamath Falls. As we pulled into town, he dropped me off at a Walmart, which was closed, along with most other businesses, that being Thanksgiving Day. We said our goodbyes, and I thanked him for the ride and said bye to his dog Stella before leaving. I needed dog food, train food, water, and smoke before getting on a train, so we had to search for an open gas station, but found a store down the road eventually. It was busy, but we decided against spanging since we had plenty of money left from the $100 the lovely old lady had given us the day before. We loaded up on what we needed, and before we had walked out of the parking lot, a guy pulled up in an El Camino. "You hopping the train, son?" he asked. Yes, sir. Headed south, I replied. He dug into his wallet and pulled out a crisp $20 bill, about $1 less than I had spent in the store. I thanked him, smiled, and left. I had to walk north on the tracks and cross to the other side. I had to walk north on the tracks and cross to the other side that was bordering a lake. There were tall grass and game trails that went through the tall grass and led to the water. I gotta edit some of this. I walked along the tracks until we got to a spot near a fence and a path to flat grass. It appeared to have been used recently, as a jug of water was still sitting there. Often you would find water left in spots like this from previous tramps waiting for a train. Sometimes you could even find maybe a couple cans of food, or an old pair of pants or shoes, something they may have left behind for the next rider. A horn sounded in the distance, and I dropped my pack and tied Buster up as I went to look up the tracks for a southbound train. I could see one coming in and thanked my good luck, as I hadn't been at the hop out for more than 10 minutes. I walked back to my pack and dog near the fence and squatted down so the conductor wouldn't see me. The train neared and crept by slowly, a Union Pacific Manifest train consisting of boxcars, tankers, and piggyback cars. I waited as the train slowed down and found, to my luck, an open boxcar that stopped just in front of me. I grabbed my pack and hurried towards it, tossing it and placing my accordion in the car, followed by helping Buster into the car, who half jumped from my chest in excitement. Then I pulled myself up and looked around inside. A nice clean boxcar. I shoved some wood into the door's track in case it was slammed shut or a worker pulled it closed. It would have been better had it been a rail spike, but I didn't have one, so wood was better than nothing. We took our stuff to an empty corner, and I laid Buster's mat and a sleeping bag down so he could also sit down, and I made a place for me. We watched out the window as we slowly moved by the lake, eventually stopping just past the Walmart. We sat for quite some time, reading a book we had got in Bend for sale at the library. It eventually became dark outside, and I laid out our things so we could get underneath the sleeping bags. I could still feel the effects of the heroin from earlier, and I randomly would scratch my nose from the itching it caused. I was comfortably numb inside my sleeping bag, though, and floated off into a half-sleep, half-awake slumber until the jarring of the cars and the train beginning to lurch forward woke me up. The train was starting to leave and picked up speed as it took off from Clement Falls towards the warmer weather of California. I fell asleep off and on for what seemed like hours. The train flew through the cold night air. At one point on the ride, I thought I saw someone standing by the opening of the boxcar, but there was no way that could have been possible. It seemed as if a shadowy figure had stood there for a moment and then retreated into the darkness as I looked toward it. I dismissed it the first time it happened, but the second time I had to sit up. I had seen a figure, dark and wiry, with what appeared to be a cane or a walking stick. Dark, briefly illuminated by the passing of street lights from an adjacent highway. I suspected that we had passed Redding, California, as the territory looked familiar. We passed various houses while distancing ourselves from the road and the river, only to weave back in closer. When we got near, the light would shine through, and I could see the figure of a person standing by the door of the boxcar. I sat up even more, wiped any debris that may have been in my eyes, and looked intently. Nothing there. From my slumber abode in the boxcar, the door and the open portal to the outside world. That don't sound right. I had to pee, so I got up, put my suspenders on my shoulder, and stumbled carefully towards the boxcar door on the far end so I could see what we were approaching. I adjusted my clothes to urinate and felt relief as I finished and buttoned my pants back up. I let the cold wind hit me and tried to see a road sign from the highway or a familiar landmark to gauge my current position. This route had several tunnels to pass through while getting close to Roseville, and I knew that the train would stop in Stockton, where I could get off or continue south to Barstow. My goal was to get off in Stockton and take a track over to Oakland, where I could get on an eastbound toward Salt Lake City. From nowhere, I felt two hands grab me and jerk me from the opening, throwing me to the ground, or so I thought. But instead of falling to the ground in my inevitable death, I was gliding relatively fast, backwards, away from the boxcar, passing an oil tanker and being flung into an empty, high-walled gondola. I hit the car hard, and the remnants of iron ore dug into my knees and hands as I hit the ground on all fours. I looked behind me, and a shadowy figure approached me rapidly. I turned to meet him and attempted to throw a punch, but my whole body froze as I met his gaze with mine. The moon reflected on his face, smooth, deceptive, and cold, but handsome at the same time, his long dark hair flowing around his ears and shoulders. He wore a hat similar to mine, although it had an older, authentic look. His eyes were the color of amber orange, and starkly contrasted with his skin, which appeared a silver gray in the light of the moon. He rushed me, and before I knew it, he was on me again, pushing me back with uncanny speed and off my feet into the gondola wall, pinning me against it, unable to resist. His eyes rose to mine, and I trembled and shook at the impossibility of what was happening. Still, before I could think about what I could do, he opened his mouth to reveal two large fangs and thrust his mouth onto my neck and into my jugular vein. As he bit into it, and I shook violently, trying to escape, he held me firmly, and the next thing I knew, we were flying beside the train, him draining my life and my head reeling from the experience and sensation of what was happening. Everything spun out of control, and I could feel like life was beginning to drain from me, and it was like I was about to slip out of consciousness when I was thrown into the open boxcar. The last thing I could remember was a faint voice telling me I needed to find someone to feed on if I wished to continue in this world, and to fear the sun after this last day. I tried to stay conscious, but couldn't seem to wake up completely. It was like I had overdosed, slipping into unconsciousness, but everything was too real to be a hallucination. I passed out and lay there on the cold boxcar floor for hours, falling in and out of sleep, shaking and convulsing, until I finally awoke in the early morning, hours before sunrise. When I got up, the train was pulling into what I knew to be Stockton and began to slow to a crawl. I slowly got up into my feet, incredibly exhausted and weak. I wobbled over to my pack where Buster growled and showed his fangs. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked. He backed away and bared his teeth at me in a low snarl. Then I remembered what had happened the night before. A vampire attack. No, that couldn't happen. Vampires are not real. I can't even believe my thoughts for a moment, but I wasn't sure of what I could remember that actually happened. I tried to put everything together, but I was missing parts. Then I heard his voice again, clearly as if he was right next to me. "You need to feed, or you will die. Find prey and drink." So I turned around expecting him to be there, but he was not. I kneeled, got my pack, put my stuff together, and looked over at Buster, sitting in the opposite corner. I called to him again, his command to get ready. "Up, Buster." He looked at me with a head tilt and reluctantly and unsurely decided I was okay, though he could sense something was wrong. I could feel something was off, but I couldn't believe what was happening. Vampires did not exist. Oh, but we do, so I heard the voice say again. Then what have you done to me? I asked, but all I heard was a muffled reply. You know what to do. Drink blood. Feed on a... I couldn't hear the noise of the... I couldn't hear from the noise of the train starting to slow into what seemed like the outskirts of Sacramento. I wasn't sure if he had just stopped talking to me or if I had imagined it or something. I don't know. I just kind of ad-libbed that. It wouldn't be long till the train would hopefully stop. See, I kind of overwrote there. But it was always hit or miss on southbound. I felt horrible, like there was an insatiable hunger inside me. It's like I was hungover, strung out, and fatigued all at once. I felt weak and the sun hurt my eyes. I tried to gather my thoughts about everything that was happening, and I screamed out loud curses at the mysterious stowaway who had somehow drugged me. Or was it the guy in the Suburban? I just couldn't tell. But I heard that voice, and it was the same as the man in the gondola, not that of the Suburban guy. The train screeched and jerked as it began to slow down. This would be the Stockton side out. The trains often stopped it to let other trains pass by. I had to get off and get. I felt like I knew I was wanting and feeding for something. I just couldn't put my finger on it. I know that I needed a beer after that crazy night. I looked over at Buster, who had calmed down somewhat, but still watched my every movement intensely, as if I was a stranger walking up into our camp at night. He just didn't seem to trust me. So it stops there. And I'll tell you a little bit more. And maybe I'll redo this one day and make it whenever I get it all properly edited and read it better. But this is just kind of gives you a little idea. So he gets off the train and gets his dog, and as he's getting off the train, and there's like another train here, a couple other tracks. He gets off, he has to climb under, go under another train, go over here to this little road that goes down on the side of the train tracks, and then there's like houses on either side with walls, like concrete walls or whatever. So he gets off and he starts walking with his dog. He starts walking and he hears somebody, hey. And they're like, don't go near that tent. And he's like, what? And he sees this girl running up to him. She's like, you didn't just come out of that tent, did you? And he's like, no, I just hopped off this train. And she's like, I'm sorry. That's my tent down there. I'm just making sure you know it. Nobody's going down there and rifling through my stuff. He's like, oh yeah, no. He's like, we just jumped off this train and we're supposed to go get something to eat, something to drink. And she's like, well, do you want some help? Do you want me to go Spanish with him? So she like starts talking him up and whatnot. And he's like, well, sure, whatever. So it's like this black chick, and she's got like super long braids in her hair, like almost way down past her ass, you know. And she's like, she's kind of cute, but she's like kind of off in a way. And she's like, yeah, just walk back over to the tent with me. I'm gonna get some cigarettes and make sure everything, you know, is zipped up. They go back over there, and as he's walking with her, he starts to like smell her and like looking at her, and he's like looking at her neck, and he's looking like at the veins on her arms and whatnot. And he just starts getting this feeling that like he wants to do something. Like he can't understand what it is yet, but you know, it's he's wanting to feed on her, but he doesn't know it because like everything since that happened has just like been super hazy, and he doesn't really understand like what's going on. He's still trying to make sense of it. He's like, that couldn't have happened. There's no such thing as vampire. Vampire didn't just come and jerk me out of a, you know, and fly around with me and throw me back in the train. It's like, that's not possibly what could happen. So it turns out that that is what happened, and this vampire had been following them for quite some time, kind of like stalking them. And so he gets off, and they go over to the tent, gets some cigarettes, locks everything up, and they go up to um, Arby's or something. I can't remember what's in that area, but they have to walk up a few blocks or whatever, and she shows them how to walk out, and they go off to this little shopping center, and they're trying to hustle up some money and whatnot, and they end up making a little bit of money, get some food, and he does not have an appetite. He's like, he should be hungry. He hasn't ate since like yesterday morning. He's like, he didn't touch none of his train food. He's like, but he's just not hungry. He tries to eat and just can't do it. Can't stomach it. So they're like, let's get some beer. He's like, man, I need to get some beer, but he's like, I feel like I need something stronger. So they end up getting like a fifth of whiskey. So they get some cigarettes, whiskey, and she gets some food and water. And she's like, well, you can come back and hang out and drink, And she's like, if you want, you can sleep in my tent tonight, blah, blah, blah. And this is like I'd say 1 or 2 o'clock by this time, so it gets dark about 6 o'clock or so. So they go back to where her tent's at, whatever. It's like a little patch of trees by one of the concrete walls and whatnot. They're hanging out, and she's got a little radio, and they're listening to music, and he feels kind of out of it, but she's just kind of like talking and doing this and doing that. And she comes over and sits by him. He just can't get that idea, and he remembers what that voice told him: "Gotta feed, gotta drink, or you will die." And gradually, throughout the day, he's just feeling worse and worse and worse and worse. And this feeling, he can hear this chick's heart beating. And he's like, no, he can hear the blood like flowing through her heart, through her veins. He's like, no, this can't be happening, And the dog's like in the tent, laying down, like doesn't really want to interact with him. And it's just and sitting there, and they start. She's like talking to him, and then he's just like looking at her, and she's like, what? What's going on? What's wrong with you? And next thing he knows, he's just on top of her. He's like throwing her down, and she's like, what the fuck are you doing? Get off of me, get off of me. Like pins her hands down, and he just goes down. Fucking just bites her in the neck. And as he's doing it, he's like, what the fuck am I doing? But he can't stop. And he can feel like throughout the day his teeth are growing like out, like longer. And he's like, what the fuck? Throughout the whole day, he's like, what the fuck? What's going on? Like I got a toothache on both sides. And he's like, no. And he's thinking, no, there's not teeth growing out of my. No, this is not